Okay, we are doing our first ever Q&A for our Friday shiur. So yeah, questions. Okay, so let's start with Tamar. Go ahead, Tamar.
So I have a question that has like a general version and then maybe a specific version, but let me ask the general version first and then I'll see
Sure.
if I want to be specific. So the question is like, when do you know if you're like, how do you decide if you are on the level to do something like that is not required, you know?
That's a great
So
question. Yeah.
yeah. I've definitely had like differences of opinion in my own life and also like disagreements with other people about like, should you, okay, this is not the specific example I was going to give, but like, should you try not to watch like frivolous TV shows because like it's a waste of time? Okay, let's say for
Right.
example,
Right.
right? Obviously, it's not usher in any normal interpretation of like, you know, things like this, but like, a person on a really high level wouldn't do that.
Right.
So then like, okay, so like,
Yeah.
should you try to do that?
Okay, that's a great
Yeah.
question. Okay, so I have a three-part answer so far. And the third part, okay. I'm gonna start with just a distinction here, okay? The question that you're asking, um, I I feel like it could be divided into all right, let me just answer it. I'll answer it the way that I'm thinking. So step one is that I think a person should always be in a state of experimentation, in terms of like pushing their own boundaries and like striving for more. And I think that if you are thinking about taking something upon yourself, whether it's in halacha or whether it's like in your general perfection, like the examples that you gave, I think the first step um, is to try it as a limited time experiment. We've talked about this before in various capacities, but like, I'm a big fan of the 2 week experiment because I find like 1 week is good, but like 2 weeks gives you like a real chance to like see what does it look like if my life is like this. But then what you do is you keep it only to 2 weeks and you are firm about it. You don't say like, oh, 2 weeks and then I'll continue doing it. I think maybe in advanced mode you could do that, but say like, no, just 2 weeks and then I'm going to stop doing this. And then you go back to your normal routine and then just see how your life went, how your life was improved, or see how you could handle it. But you stick to it for those 2 weeks. And the reason why I say limited is because it could be very intimidating to your psyche to take something on if your psyche thinks that it's permanent, and that itself can mess with the experiment. Like number one, like I'm saying that's a good reason to not take something on permanently in general, but also if you're doing the experiment, just saying, okay, it's gonna be a 2 week experiment and that's it, and I'm going to use it as a way to get data points. I think that's a good first move. And I think that it's a good idea to like take areas that you want to work on and then come up with little experiments within those areas on a like frequent, ideally regular basis. So my own personal preference is the Hebrew months or the Gregorian calendar months. So for example, we just started December yesterday. So it doesn't have to be exactly the months, but like let's say like next week will be the first full week in December. So you could say 2 week experiment on working on like making better use of my time and like cutting down on TV or whatever, and then say 2 week experiment and then go back and see what happens. So that would be my general advice of experiments. Second piece of advice would be
Can I ask about the
yeah,
first
sure, yeah,
piece
go
or
ahead.
second piece?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
How do you, this is kind of, maybe you're going to get to this, but like, how would you interpret that data?
That's a good question. How would you interpret that data? I think you just have to be honest with yourself in terms of first seeing, what were the benefits and detriments in objective terms, what were the benefits and detriments in subjective terms, like how did I feel about doing this? Do I think this is sustainable? Is this sustainable in a different version, like if I dial it down or dial it up, or in a different format? And it's just a lot of trial and error. I mean, I found that like trial and error in general is just the best way to know yourself and to like to expand your limits. The other piece of advice here, which is I heard this from Rabbi Chait, and he wasn't quoting this Rambam, but he was borrowing the language of this Rambam. So I'm just going to show you the Rambam, even though it has nothing to do with this. I don't think it has anything to do with this. So this is the Rambam when he's talking about Mashiach, and he says that a person should not. I always forget if it's in 11 or 12. Let's see here. Hold on a second. Yeah. So he's talking about how all the theories about Mashiach, he says that these were, we know that Mashiach is coming, but he says, for example, Yeshmin hachachamim she'omrin shekodem bias hamelech Mashiach yavo Eliyahu. Some chachamim say that before Mashiach comes, then Eliyahu is going to come. V'chol elu hadvarim v'kiyot behen lo yeda adam heach yihu ad yihu. No, all these things and things like them about Mashiach, no one knows how they're going to happen until they happen. Shedvarim sesumim etel neviim. These are things that were concealed even to the Nevi'im. Gam hachachamim ein lahem kabbalah. Even the Chachamim didn't have a tradition in these matters. They only were theorizing based on the Psukim. That's why they have a machlokus. The order of these things at the time of Mashiach and their particulars are not fundamental. And then he says, here's the part soon. Lo yasok adam b'divrei hahagados, lo yarich b'midrashos ha'amurim b'inyanim elu v'kiyot behen. Person should not be involved in the non-halachic teachings or in the midrashim that were said about this topic. V'lo yisimem ikar, and he should not make them essential or make them important. And here's the line: She'ein mevin loli de yirav loli de ava. They do not bring you to fear of God or love of God. Okay, so Rabbi Chait was once asked this question, which was a slight variant of your question, a little bit narrower, which is, should I know whether to take upon myself a chumrah, whether to be like strict about something in a mitzvah? And the answer that Rabbi Chait gave, I think this was in one of his Q&As, is he said, if it brings you to Avas Hashem or Yiras Hashem, good, and if it doesn't, then leave it. And I thought that was just a good barometer. It doesn't answer on the level of particularity about like how to go about trying it out, but I thought that was like a good measure. And like I've often found myself let's say like in yeshiva, there's always going to be like certain chumras that are like, popular or whatever. And I'll see other people doing them and I'm like, oh, maybe I should do that too. And I'll be like, wait, is this going to increase my avas Hashem or yiras Hashem? If not, then no. And he wasn't saying that as an exhaustive thing. Like there are certain chumras you take on just, as a precaution against violating halacha. This was, I think, more of the type of chumrah that you were talking about. I had a third thing, but I don't remember what it was. The third thing was I think that if you go for a very long time without trying to change your, to improve things or increase things, then I think that's also bad. So the example, I've probably given this example recently, which is that when I taught high school, I would come home and then take a brief break and eat and then immediately start preparing for my next classes. And then I realized that like I needed more of a break. So I basically forced myself to not start working until 8 p.m. Like I would force myself to have like a 3-hour break or whatever, and that was very good for me at the time. But then what happened was when I stopped teaching high school and I was teaching in yeshiva and my whole routine changed, I was still operating in the mode of I need a 3-hour break in my day, and I realized like maybe that was then, maybe I have more stamina now, or maybe since my schedule changed, it's a different thing. So I did an experiment and sure enough, I didn't need a 3-hour break anymore. I needed less, So I think it's also important to just not take your current status as your actual needs and realize like, oh, maybe that served me or these habits served me at a certain time, but maybe like it's time to move on. And then that's another reason to experiment. Yeah.
Interesting. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Next question. Good question.
I do have a follow-up that I can wait until like after some other questions. So there's a follow-up to this one.
Yeah, let's wait and just see if anyone else has something. Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, so the question that I have, you don't have to answer this because I haven't heard you speak about this before, but it's related to like Zionism and maybe it's following up on the last Rambam that you read. I'm kind of wondering, like, is there a lot of people in like religious Zionist circles say that there's like value in building up, the state of Israel because it could be like the smichas, rishas smichas, let's say the beginning of our geulah. And we don't know. I guess that's like been the presumption that I've heard a lot from people in yeshiva that like, we just don't know. So it's presumptuous to say that. But I'm curious if you think that even if we don't know, is there a value in being part of that society in terms of like living in Eretz Israel and contributing to the government and the state in terms of like maybe it will be contributing. And maybe part of the question also is that like I'm learning Midian Achronim now and like so many psukim in Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel. I'm reading it, and like I really feel blessed that maybe I'm wrong to think this, but like me, the kibbutz galios, like back in Israel, there's Jews from all over the world there, and also like the technological innovations that they've been doing in Eretz Yisrael are also just kind of like incredible, and are seeing history, happening through my eyes, like this monumental thing. But I don't know if that's the right approach, that influenced my decision to move to Eretz Yisrael. It's a lot. It's a big question. So I guess you can just take what you want.
So as you're acknowledging, that is a very multifaceted question, and a true answer to the question would involve, for example, like going into the topic of, is there a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael? Like that's, like the whole Ramban Rambam thing, and like what is the current status of the state of Israel versus like the Malchus Yisrael envisioned by the Torah, and what's the relationship? And I actually am just not knowledgeable in those things. I have not looked into it. The only actual book that I've read on it, which is very good, is so the Rav wrote a Hebrew essay called Kol Dodi Dofek, and there are different translations of it. The translation that I read, and which I recommend, is titled Fate and Destiny. It's available on Amazon, and I recommend this one because this is translated by by Professor Lawrence Kaplan, who translated Halachic Man and maybe Halachic Mind also, with working with the Rav on that. And he is someone who knows the Rav's works and is very good, and I trust him. And also, I happen to have accidentally become like Facebook friends with him, so like I can ask him questions, which is really cool. And he just commented on something that I wrote just like 10 minutes ago, so it's a nice to have that connection. But it's a very short book, and I think that if you haven't read it already, then I think reading it will like address a lot of your questions now. So again, not my area, but I will say one thing, which is that in terms of the way people view Mashiach, it seems like there are two general ways that people view Mashiach and kibbutz galios and all that stuff. Okay, there are the people who view it as like this is scripted into history in a way where, like, when things are happening, like, is this the kibbutz galios? Is this the Mashiach or not? And the extreme form of that, and again, I don't even know about this, but my understanding is like Satmar, the reason why they're so anti-Israel is like, we don't have the right to like, do anything to like support the state of Israel until like God gives us the green light or something like that, and so for us to like take things into our own hands is somehow bad. Similarly, like there are people who are very squeamish about Machon HaMikdash or Machon HaMishkan, like making the Kalim of the base Mikdash. And I think that squeamishness comes from like, let's put it this way. None of those people get upset about the fact that people build their sukkah like a week before Sukkot. No one gets upset about the fact that you buy matzah ahead of Pesach. This halachically is no different. Like having the kalim to use for the Beis Mikdash is just preparing early, like, getting a non-bar mitzvah boy tefillin before his first day where he's a bar mitzvah. I never understood that halakhically, but I think it comes from like a non-halakhic place of like squeamishness that we can't do anything. In contrast to that view, there's the Rambam, which like I'm not going to go through all the halachos right now, but since I have it open already, when he's talking about who is Mashiach, so he has what I call like the Mashiach checklist, where he goes through like what qualities you need in order to qualify as Mashiach. And he says, hold on just 1 second. I'll just read this one paragraph. There's more before and after. V'im yamod melech mi beis David, if a king from the house of David arises, hogeh Torah, who is knowledgeable in Torah, but osik b'mitzvos k'David aviv, and is involved in mitzvos like David his father, kafi torah shebeksav v'shabal peh, following torah shebeksav and torah shebal peh, v'Yakov kol Yisrael leilech ba u'lechazik bidka, and he motivates all of Israel to follow the Torah, and he strengthens its building, its foundation. V'yilachem milchamos Hashem, and he wages the wars of Hashem. Harzeh b'chezkas shu melech Mashiach. Then that person is a candidate for Mashiach. Im asa v'hitzliach, if he did this and succeeded, v'nitzach kol ha'umos shesevivav, and he defeats all the enemies around Israel, ubana mikdash b'makomo, and builds the base mikdash in its place, v'kibetz nidchei Yisrael, and he gathers the dispersed of Israel, harzeh Mashiach b'vadai, then that is definitely Mashiach. So even the way he expresses the halachos is very interesting. He's saying these are the sign the checklist that a person would need to fulfill to be a candidate. And then if he does that and he succeeds, then that is Mashiach. The Rambam's presentation of Mashiach is it's entirely in our own hands, and like, you see, let's say, like, Rabbi Akiva supported Bar Kokhba, and like, if that had succeeded and Bar Kokhba didn't get killed, and like he brought Jews back or whatever and built the Beis Hamikdash, he would have been Mashiach. Again, it's no different than any other halacha of like, if you have a lulav and like the tiomis is intact and like it's green and like it is the right size, then that is a kosher lulav. So according to that whole way of doing it, then it's not so much a question of like, does God want us to be doing these things or not? It's a question of like, how practical is it for us to do this? And like, and could this, like, in other words, it's not a question of like behind the scenes, is this really, what's the phrase you use? Reishis tzmichas gulasenu? Is it Reishis tzmichas gulasenu or is it not? It's not like a question of like if we really saw things from God's perspective, we would see yes or no. It's a question of like, can we bring that about now or not? And is it worthwhile to do so given like all of the complex political situations or not? So that's the best I can do to answer your question, which is partially a national question, partially a personal question. For example, like there were, I forgot who did this, but like there were Jews who when the kibbutz galus rishon was happening, when they were going back to Eretz Yisrael, there were Jews who stayed in Bavel for good reasons, and it was considered to be the right move. And then there were Jews who were criticized for not going back. So like there's lots of factors here, and that's where it gets really, really complicated. So that's, I think, all I can say. I'm just not, I have not looked into the topic of Zionism, and I know there's like lots of species of Zionism.
Yeah, I mean, I read the Rev's Kol Dodido fake, but I don't think I read that translation. But yeah, that had been like a major part of my connection to Israel for a long time. But I feel like people also take that a little bit out of context because they think it means like, especially like with the knocking, that like that God is knocking on the door, like waking up. I feel like people often use it like, you must make Aliyah because what if it's too late? Like the shiur analogy, but I don't remember the Rev really. I think he was saying wake up to the historical significance, but not necessarily like you need to make Aliyah based on that. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. That's another thing also just to be aware of, which is that that people are very quick to again, there are halachic aspects to this, but then in the realm of non-halakha, people are quick to bring proofs from midrashim and statements of Chazal and translate that directly into action. And one thing that or two things that are good to keep in mind. One is something Rabbi Chait emphasizes, that that you should never take any midrash and make that into the ikar, because there's lots of midrashim and they contradict each other. Okay, and Chazal, and I give a whole Sunday share on this in YBT. Chazal, it's not Chazal. The Rishonim and the Gaonim say we don't bring proofs from midrashim, from Agarita. Like we don't just bring proofs in the sense of these are theories and ideas, but not like, like this is what you must do because, like there's a Chazal that says anyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz it's as if he worships idols. And there's a halakha that you should give up your life rather than worship idolatry. So should you give up your life rather than move to Israel? And, like people make all these stupid arguments just based on their own imagination instead of like actually like learning through stuff. And it's much more nuanced than that. So yeah, I wish I knew more about it, but and I'm gonna say something off the record. Okay. Wait, where are we here? Pause recording. Okay, good question though. Important question. I wish I had more to say. Okay, next question, Ayala.
Okay, I have two questions, but maybe I'll just start with one and then see.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm like thinking about ideas or like have question or like I'm trying to come up with my own ideas, like let's say before looking at the Mefarshim and Yerushalayim or things like that, I noticed that like every single idea I come up with without fail, like I can point exactly to like what other idea I've been thinking about recently, which it's connected to.
Yeah.
And I was wondering like what to make of that. Like, I think that's just like naturally how we think. So like either how can I like direct that in a positive way to like come up with new ideas, or how do I like move around that? Like,
yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so first of all, I want to acknowledge the validity of what you said, which is that I think that is partially the way that we do think, and not just think. I think it's the way that we train ourselves in every area. And the example that comes to my mind is like when I was, in my pre-Jewish life, when I was, my life was about classical music and I was composing music and I listened to like my early stuff. All it is just like copying the greats, and like emulating their styles and all that stuff. And then there was a point when I was like 15, I felt self-conscious about that. And then I was like, no, if you look at Beethoven's stuff, his first symphony, he didn't become Beethoven until like the Fifth Symphony and on, or arguably the Third Symphony, but all the other part, he was like a Mozart copycat, and like that's how all artists, start. And so I think it's only natural to do that. And when you're in your stage, which is like early on in your learning, I think like that's totally fine. That being said, there is what we used to call this in yeshiva. It's not, I guess what I'm about to say is like a what do you call it? A special case of it, which is a previous svara syndrome, where like you say an answer that is just based on the svara that you heard around the topic like beforehand, or like what you happen to be like working on. And I think the first step is to be aware of it, which you are. The second step is to there's two ways to do it, either to lean into it, and then through like working on clarifying the ideas that you naturally are coming up with, you'll eventually come to find more nuanced ideas. The other approach is to force yourself to break free of it and to try to think about it from a different angle. And I know I said this recently in a Monday night Mishlei shiur, but I'll repeat it because it's a different audience here, of when I was in yeshiva and I was asking for methodology tips, and I was asking if you have a machlokes and you're trying to figure out the svara, you're trying to figure out like what they're arguing about and come up with the conceptual definitions. I said, which side do you start working on first? And Rabbi Mann said, the side that makes the most sense to you, because since it already makes sense to you, then you have an intuition and you should like work with that and formulate it. Rabbi Moskowitz said, no, that's the wrong approach, because that's gonna, you're already thinking within the box. And if you lean into that, it'll keep you thinking within the box. So you should specifically start with the side that doesn't make sense to you to break out of your habitual way of thinking. And then I asked Rabbi Chait, and he said, both of them are wrong. The answer is that when it comes to thinking, then there are no rules, and so you should do that. But I think Rabbi Moskowitz's technique is something that I think could serve you, which is if you could find a way to approach this from an angle that's not how you usually think of it. So that could be using one of the Mefarshim who you don't usually use. It could be like starting from the ground up and pretending you're explaining this to a non-Jew who doesn't hold by any of your premises. It could be like, I'm going to say using another of the Mefarshim. I mean, like, let's say, for example, like a classic example, let's say like you're getting your Purim time and you start to learn Megillas Esther and you find yourself just, like spitting back ideas that either you've heard in previous shiurim or that you're hearing your dad talk about like in his shiurim, So like choose a different perush, and like that none of your influences and you have not have not been thinking about, and then like that could like have an inroad. And I think that's really all you can do. I mean, exposing yourself to different ways of thinking can help as well. It's along the same lines, but like that's part of why I like being. I think everyone should have a variety generating source of ideas that's outside of your bubble and your comfort zone. So that's why I, for example, am in certain Facebook groups and on Twitter, because I follow certain people and follow certain groups that I get exposed to ideas that are like radically not from the same sources that I learn, and that can keep things fresh and like keep you thinking about things in different ways. So that's what I would say.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone who hasn't had a question wants to ask one yet? And if not, then we'll circle back to tomorrow. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
So I have a question that's, I think, more practical halacha,
Mm-hmm.
Which was, I was curious as to like what degree is it actually chayav to have like meat and wine on Shabbos?
Yeah.
I've been like vegetarian for many years. And this is something
Right.
like Oren and I have been negotiating for a while.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm curious, like, to what degree is it like actually necessary?
Yeah. So again, just as a disclaimer, because this is the first Q&A I'm doing for Friday group, is I am not a posek, and so I'm not going to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. All I can discuss is the theoretics. So the first thing I'll say is that there's no chiyuv to have meat and wine on Shabbos, okay, at all. There is a chiyuv of oneg Shabbos, which I'm just going to read from the Rambam, because that is the source, and this will also this also reinforced the thing that we're not posking because we don't posking directly out of the Rambam. There's Oneg Shabbos, and he says, what is Oneg Shabbos? Ezehu Inug. What is, he calls it Inug Shabbos? So you have to have fatty food. Okay, it doesn't literally mean fatty. I think it means delectable food. Umashke mevusam, and spiced beverages. I don't think it literally means spice. It means like fancy beverages. L'Shabbos. Everything according to a person's like monetary level. The more a person increases in the expenditures of Shabbos and in making lots of good foods, the better it is. And if you can't afford it, even if you just make a cooked vegetable, something special, that's considered to be special. And then he says you should not go into debt in order to do this. So that's Shabbos. Okay, no specific chiyuv for meat and wine. Okay, except like meat as part of Kiddush. The only chiyuv of eating on Shabbos is the 3 meals. And that has to be bread. And then there's certain geulas for the 3rd meal. But everyone's chayav to have 3 meals on Shabbos of bread. Again, that's the default halacha. But Yom Tov, there is a chiyuv of meat and wine, but it's not for women. Okay, so Yom Tov, Rambam says, for Simcha, this is in, I forgot to cite the source. All right, hold on. I gotta cite the source for the audio in case anyone's wondering. It's I was reading from Hilchos Shabbos, Perek Lamed, Halacha, something. Halacha. Oh, sorry. Hold on just a second. Sorry, I missed an important halacha about this. Sorry. Halacha Zayin. Okay, but let's read on. Then he says chayav. So he says chiv sudos shlishis, or sorry, 3 sudos. Then he says achilas basar u'shesiyas yam b'Shabbos inu kula v'hushi shehaisa yado masagas. Okay, so he says that meat and wine on Shabbos does constitute oneg Shabbos, but you're not chayav to drink wine and eat meat on Shabbos. Okay, so that is it is a kiyum to eat meat and drink wine. Okay, but then in Yom Tov he says in Shvisas Yom Tov Vav. Where are we? Vav. Oh yeah. Yud Zayin. He says Shivas Yemei Pesach u'Shmonas Yemei Hachag im Shar Yom Tovim. So the 7 days of Pesach, the 8 days of Sukkot, and the other Yom Tovim, which is Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah. Okay. Kulan asurim b'sefer b'tanis. All of them are asur in eulogizing and fasting. Adam lihios behen sameach v'tov lev. A person is obligated to be happy and glad of heart. Hu ubanav ishto ubnei beso v'chol nivlim alav. The man and his children and his wife and his members of his household and everyone dependent on them. Shnemar, as it says, you should rejoice on your festival. And I think it's machlokas whether this is d'oraisa or d'rabbanan, what the Rambam is about to say. Even though the pasuk is talking about the korban shlamim, which is only in the time of the mikdash, there's a mitzvah to bring joy to his sons, his children, and the members of his household, each one with what is fitting for him. How so? And this is what the halakha I want to get to. Ketzad, how so? Haktanim nosim lehem klayos ve'agozim umigdanos. Kids, you give them what do you call it? Nuts. Popcorn, nuts, and like cakes. Vanashim, and women, konei lahem begadim v'tachshit kfi mamona. You buy clothing and jewelry for them according to your money. V'ha'anashim, and the men ochlim basar v'shosin yayin. They eat meat and drink wine. Ein simcha ela b'basar, ein simcha ela b'yayin. There's no simcha without meat, and there's no simcha without wine. So these are stereotyped categories, but that's how halacha operates categorically. And the way Chazal set it up, not every kid likes candy, not every woman likes clothing, not every man likes meat. But the default way that the halacha is structured is that's what you do for simcha. And I've heard, again, this is not psak, I've heard that since it's for simcha, then if a person doesn't like meat, let's say if a man doesn't like meat, or let's say like, my brother is allergic to wine, then you wouldn't be putter from drinking it or eating it because it's not simcha for you, In contrast to, for example, in the time of the mikdash, you have to eat the Korban Pesach. If you don't like meat, it doesn't matter because the Korban Pesach is not for Simcha. Korban Pesach is a chiyuv to eat the Korban Pesach, So to my knowledge, then even a man, so first of all, there's no Ein Simcha Ela B'Basar, Ein Simcha Ela B'Yayin, to my knowledge, at least based on the Rambam, is only for men. It's a chiyuv on Yom Tov, but only if it brings you Simcha. And it's not a chiyuv on Shabbos, although it's a kiyum on Shabbos. Okay, so again, this is not psak. This is just like theoretics. There's, I'm sure, lots of different opinions. There's all these questions also about like, is this for all the meals? Is it only during the day? Et cetera, et cetera. Is grape juice considered wine? All these halachic things. But that's the general thing.
Would you mind sending me some of these sources at a later time?
Yeah, do me a favor and just text me on WhatsApp, and then I'll remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Okay, next. Yeah, Brooke.
I accidentally did the clapping emoji. I don't know how to get rid of it. No.
It'll go away on its own.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. This isn't, I don't know how much of a halakhic question this is. It was just something I was wondering, and I figured it's a Q&A. I'll ask it, and then if it's like totally off topic, we just won't address it. But I was thinking, like, I was going down a rabbit hole of like theoreticals and theoretics. I was thinking a lot of the time you want to like help people find jobs. So when someone is looking for a job and you find a company that's looking for someone who can do that job, then obviously you'd want to recommend them to this company.
Right.
But by recommending someone to a company, you're essentially like vouching for them and saying, I know this person and I know that like they'd be good for this role. And then I thought, well, what happens if you have a friend who, like, let's say complains a lot, or like, I don't know, is annoying, or like would be toxic to a workplace environment in some way, or this workplace environment, and you don't think that like morally you should recommend them, but either the friend asks you or you're like, oh, this has never happened to me. It was just like a
sure. Yeah. It's a good rabbit hole. Yeah. So I'll tell you the two analogous situations that I've been in, and I'm saying I'm answering based on that. One is, when I taught high school, I used to have to write letters of recommendation for students for like applying to seminaries and stuff. And it was a very rare thing, but like there were certain students who I did not feel comfortable recommending them because they were not good people for seminaries. Like I was like, if this person goes to this, like this person caused so much trouble in high school, like I can't in good conscience recommend them to a seminary, so I would decline to do it. The other example is I don't know if you experience this. I mean, I guess a lot of you don't use Facebook, but like on Facebook, sometimes people be like, hey, promote my business, and I don't, even if it's someone who I know, I don't feel comfortable promoting someone's business unless I know that like their business is good and like that they do what they like, what they say, and like it's a good product or it's a good service. Like I like, you're a great person, but like, does that mean that like you can, that you can make high quality XYZ? So I'm with you right there on the like the morality of endorsing someone when you can't wholeheartedly endorse them, either because you know of something negative that will like come about or whatever. I think that there are times when you can do this in an honest way, where like there were letters of recommendation that I would write where I would write the letter of recommendation. I would tell students this up front. I said, you asked me for a letter of recommendation, I'm going to be honest. And I would state the students, strengths and weaknesses, because I think it's very important for the seminary to know who the student is. And if like the student is like an arsonist, then like, I never had to do that, but like, then like they should know about it. But let's say the student is like very, very, is bad at reading social cues, like it's important for them to know about that. Like, is this a seminary where like they can handle that or not? They should know that the kid's gonna have like certain social issues there. So I would be honest, and I think you could do the same thing of recommending someone for a company. Again, in the right circumstance, you have to be careful not to be in violation of Lashon Hara, et cetera, et cetera. but then the other consideration is that I think there are certain times when like the company, you can trust the company to vet the person, and like if they're going to do an interview and these qualities are going to come out on the interview and the company still wants to hire them, then that's not on you, that's on the company. And I think it's very, very dependent on the particular circumstances. Or let's say, for example, another capacity in which I get put in this in this situation is people ask if they could list me on their like shotgun resumes, and I'll get calls about like potential like shidduchim for students of mine, and like there are certain things which I won't disclose because this is the type of thing that like this will come up on a date, and like it's not my place to say, and it'll come up, and like it's not for me to like be the one to say that. But then in other cases, then like I do feel like like let's say this has not happened in recent years, but like let's say like I know that a student is has been dabbling with like going off the derech, and like they're set up with someone who's from like I feel like it's my responsibility to mention that because person could be taken in under false pretenses, so pretext, whatever the word is. Yeah. So I don't know the those are the only universals I can give, which is not much. Highly dependent on the circumstance. So I'm basically just like validating your question and just saying what I've done, but I can't give more principles based on that. Yeah. Okay, good. Everyone said a question so far. Let's go back to Tamar.
Okay, I think maybe I want this question off the record. I'm not sure. It's just a specific version of the.
Okay, so segueing from the off the record discussion, that was really good. No, but it was good that it was off the record. Is how does one balance like when choosing a role or a career in life? Look, we all hold that benefiting the community and doing good for others is a good thing. But the question, I think, tell me if I'm wrong about this, Ayala, is like, how do you balance your own priorities and goals and objectives with like prioritizing the community and benefiting others? Is that a fair? You can add or modify the question if you want.
Yeah, that, and also like I feel like sometimes when you try, or at least for myself, when I try to think of like how I could benefit the community, it just gets like way out of hand, and like I could be doing a million things. So it's like a very big thing.
Yeah.
But then to make it small, it feels kind of limiting.
Yeah. Oh man, I hate this question. No, it's a good question. The reason why I hate it is because there is always, this is part of my own nagging feeling of like I'm just gonna be selfish for a second. Okay, I mean, I said off the record of like, I used to teach high school and now I'm teaching in yeshiva, and there's pros and cons for each one. But one of the pros of teaching high school was I was teaching, dozens of students, and now I'm teaching like a dozen students, well, I guess 2 dozen, and also like, and so I've had job offers in the last couple of years. I guess I'm gonna put this off the record, going back to the on the record. So I think that if to the extent, let me put it this way, to the extent that you do have, okay, I think the answer to that question should be guided by your ambition and your talents. Okay. In other words, I think if you are, let's say, not a leadership type personality, whatever that means, okay, then even though you should benefit others, you're not going to be successful if you force yourself into a role that is not suited to you and that you're not passionate about, So I think to whatever extent you do this should emerge from your natural talents and ambitions, and those could change over time, but like, there are, people, if you'll see like people who make waves in certain fields, like they have things that are like their thing, like there are people who, let's say like, who I had this interesting example. Hold on just a second. I think there was a Rav who passed away sometime in the last couple of months that like his big thing was like the aguna problem, you know, and like he was very passionate about that. Now, if you go to like me and you point to me and say, hey, do you think that the aguna situation is bad? I'd say yes. Then why don't you do something about it? I'd be like, because that's not my area of expertise. That's not where my passion is. Like, yeah, maybe I should do something, but that's not me. Like, you know, like harness your talent and it should emerge from there. You know, the tricky question is in that area, then like, how do you know how far to go? Like I have a friend who was a shul rav for a while, and he always used to have to like juggle the question of like, you know, there's his own learning and his own family and his own kids, like his own kids development, and then there's the needs of the congregation, and like how does he balance that? And like that's like a much tougher question, I think, than the one that you're asking, Ayala. And I don't know how to answer that question, but I think that the main question is it should be like dictated by your passions and ambitions. But then here's the contradictory advice, is that there are exceptions to the rule. I'm going to send you another resource, which is, hold on. Okay, so those, I'm sure a lot of people know this already, that I'm a big fan of the Tim Ferriss podcast. And one of the first, I'm sure that people, I'm sure he said this in many places, but this is the first place I heard it, is Tim Ferriss interviewing Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Olav Shalom. And Rabbi Sacks did not want to be a leader or a like public teacher. He wanted to be like a professional philosopher, you know, an academic. And in this episode, he talks about how basically he was a young college student, like a little bit older than Ayala, and he like went to the United States and like did like a tour of like meeting with many people, and like he tried to get a meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and like Lubavitcher Rebbe's like Aid said like, yeah, right, like you think you could just like meet with him, and like somehow like someone put in a good word and he met with him, and Lubavitcher Rebbe basically convinced him that he should go into like, you know, a leadership role, and like he did, and like the world benefited from that. So he talks about that process, and hearing him talk about how like, you know, about that, I think it could be instructive for like being a counterbalance to all the advice I just gave. So you know, similarly, like on a more personal circle thing, Rabbi Maruf, who I admire in so many ways, was going to be I think a psychologist, and he fell into being a shul rav, and like that ended up being like his passion, you know. So yeah, so I don't know though how to do it. I would just, and one more anecdote, which is, and I've told this story before also, one time it was a shiur on Shabbos, and I think it must have been like the Shabbos before one of the, you know, before like Asara B'Tevis or Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and like Rabbi Chait gave this shiur about like galus and about how bad things are, and then we had a kiddush afterwards on Shabbos, and we were all in the old building downstairs in the basement with the kiddush, and like talking in a huddle about like the shiur, and like just listing problem after problem about like how bad things are in the Jewish community. And like there's a moment of silence where like everyone had said what they were saying, we were all just sitting there depressed, and like Rabbi Chait like sighed and he said, all we can do is just keep like, you know, influencing the small circle of people around us, you know. And I think that that is another approach, which is that there are people who can make a big splash and can like influence like large groups of people, but most of us are not in that position. But there is a circle of people who you can influence, and you can widen the circle, you know, but like it has to start from the people who you actually have an influence over. And look, there are success stories and failure stories. Like I always, you know, bring up the example of Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, and that first batch turned out really bad, you know, and the second batch was 5 or 7, depending on which source you use. And that turned out, they saved all of Klal Yisrael. So like, I'm not saying it was necessarily a mistake, but like his first approach didn't work. Same thing with Avraham Avinu. His first batch of students, according to Chazal, ended up becoming Sodom and Amorah, you know, and like that ended up being really bad, you know. And so Avraham is definitely a leader, but maybe that was in the wrong way, you know. So no easy pass here. But I should say also that in terms of leadership, I'm making my way through Rabbi Sacks's book, you know, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks Leadership. This is one of his Parsha books, Lessons in Leadership, which is on the Parshios. Oh, I'm not sharing the screen, whatever. Anyway, and so he does write about leadership stuff, which I think could, so far the ideas have been very good, and it could give like insight into this issue also. Yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, if there's another short question, then we can answer it. If not, then I think this would be a good place to stop because ideally I'd like to daven mincha in 5 minutes. But if there's a 5-minute question, I could take it. Yeah, Ayala?
Yeah, so similar to Brooke's question about originally like giving people stuff. So let's say in classes, when there's people who ask for notes or in classes, or I'm sure this happens in other areas in life too.
Yeah.
Like, to what extent is it your job to be like, you don't deserve these notes because you weren't in class, and like I know you like ditched for whatever, or like,
Yeah.
no, you were in a car accident, I could give you the notes. Like, to what extent is that your job?
Oh man, I used to have an answer to that question because I used to be in that position. I used to be like the the note taker who had all the stuff, and I actually had an out, which is that this is back in the days of like handwritten notes, and I would say, sure, you can have my notes, and no one could read my handwriting, so like I didn't have to feel bad, but yeah, it's a good question because on the one hand there is a pasuk in Mishlei that says, don't withhold good from its recipients if you have the power to do it. On the other hand, like you are enabling bad like habits in them, and in a way like having a ripple effect of like promoting a culture of like cutting corners, and and then there's the question of how is this going to affect the person? Like, for example, I saw this, I don't know if this is real or a fake thing, but some picture somewhere on the internet of like, it says like, seen in a school of architecture, and it was a person's dorm room and a handwritten note stuck on it, which says like, I know you cheated on the last test. This might have been okay when you were in middle school or high school, but you're in architecture school, you're going to be building buildings, people could die. Like, like, so like, I think there's also room for saying like, let's say this is like a drama class that you have to do as an elective that is like a prerequisite versus like something that's part of your actual career where you actually like need to know the knowledge. I think there's a difference, also difference between like what the person's motives are about, like whether they actually like need the help or like they just want to like get the grade, a lot of complicated factors.
But you do think that it is like to some extent your job to balance those and not just be like, this person is going to get their negative consequences in a different way if I'm not doing it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a simple answer. I think that's what I'd say right now. Yeah, I have to rethink the area. I don't have an immediate answer. Yeah, it's a good question though. Side point, this is nothing to do directly with your question, but just like by association. So I read that what we call Rashi on the Gemara, it was certainly written by Rashi, but it was based on like something called like the Germancia, or some I forgot what the exact name is. It was like sets of notes that were passed down and added to and edited in the yeshiva for like many years, and like Rashi like compiled it and like added to it. So I think it's probably cool. Like there's certain classes in college where like there's like a Masorah of notes, and I think it's cool. Like our actual Masorah of like Rashi like comes from like this Masorah of notes, and if the people there in Torah said like, no, I'm gonna withhold that, then that would have been bad. But clearly that's not analogous to your situation. Yeah. Okay. I think this was good. If you enjoyed this, then maybe we'll do this from time to time, because definitely worked out for me because I didn't have to prepare for it. And there's also a certain thing that like spoiler alert for next week. So Sarah Spielman and Rifki Elman sent me a question. They said they were learning halacha and encountered this halacha about like cutting their fingernails, like that there's an order to cut your fingernails in. Okay. And they said, what's the deal with this halacha? So I responded back, I said, I'm not going to have time for this, but like, here's my initial thoughts. And it got in my head and I ended up like obsessively researching it for 3 days. And now I want to give a shiur on it next Friday. Okay. Like it ended up being really big. And there's something cool about Q&As that they can spark things like lines of inquiry that like for me that I never would have been interested in, but like, in addition to like the answers to the questions, they can like, it keeps the mind fresh in the same way I was describing, like following people on social media that like introduced me to areas of Judaism that I'm not attuned to. So like these were all excellent questions, and I really value Q&As for many reasons, but that's another reason. It's just it could make my own learning go in different directions. So I'm happy that this worked out. Yeah. Okay. Have a good Shabbos, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great Shabbos.
Bye.
Job.